Well, I'm going to start by doing a kind of review of yesterday's lesson, and then I'll also ask you what ideas came to your mind, and if I can ask Sue to share some of her artwork she brought and so forth. I want to hear what was burbling around. What I talked about yesterday were two main aspects: sensitive dependence upon initial condition, long phrase, the butterfly effect, which is basically that large events can be caused by small events. So you don't have to have an equal and opposite reaction. You can also have a very much disproportionate reaction through iteration through the systems, which you don't have to know about. But anyway, the butterfly effect. The butterfly that wiggles its wings in Beijing and causes a storm in California, as often said. The second part was about fractal geometry, which is the geometry that tells us that the world as it is, it's this imperfect, rough, kind of messy world, is the world and not some abstract, perfect world of circles and triangles and parallelograms. So those are the two areas I covered. Boy, that was short, huh? Got an hour and a half condensed to 5 minutes, 2 minutes. So I want to hear what came up in your mind yesterday after that. And if you weren't here, you can also join in. What came up in your mind? Actually, could I start with you, Susan, and ask you to talk about your work with the fractals and maybe hold up a few?
Well, I've been interested in fractals for a while and also in art. And I found a program on the internet that's free that you can use to make pictures, fractal pictures. And so I brought some with me. Do you just want me to show a few of them?
Yeah, show a few, yeah. Yeah, come on up here. Come on up here. That way everybody can look. And the program you used was called Fractal Explorer?
Fractal Explorer.
Fractal Explorer. And she said just Google it and you'll come up with some fractal. We'll have a little art show here thing.
Let's see. This could also be a Rorschach ink test, so you don't see different things.
Here, shall I pass them around?
Sure. It does look like I didn't know if you want to pass it around while you were talking.
Sure. This is going to be a very casual opening, so we can all talk.
Look for them that have angel images in them, so you'll see.
And remember, these fractals are created by nonlinear equations being run over and over again. And this movie I've got here also shows you that. The interesting thing, one of the interesting things to me about fractal imagery is it looks so natural, and yet this is a computer all by itself working, not some aesthetic person designing. And you'll see all sorts of very natural looking forms in fractal imagery. You might see, leaves. You might see, I've seen little eyes and faces. And yes, there's one, looks like waves. So you'll see imagery that resembles the natural turbulent imagery that you see, or shapes you see in nature.
Here's one that looks to me like a Buddha.
There's a natural image for you.
Yeah.
There's no two alike, is there?
They're similar, but not.
Self-similar. So in other words, there's a similarity in the form, but they're never identical. And one of the aspects of fractals is that they are they're always a little bit off from the other, even within a fractal image. Each part of it will be slightly different than the other.
More or less, the perfection of it is its imperfection.
The perfection of it is found in how it resembles itself. I've often thought about how we're fractally connected. The person I was as a child is not the identical person that I am now, but is fractally connected. Some of the work that's been done on face recognition, which is really bizarre when you think of it. You meet somebody 40 years later and you recognize them. How is that possible? Because our faces change. And yet there's some kind of encoding within our minds that allows us to recognize patterns. And it's the pattern of the face that we recognize. And instantaneously, without doing any work, we update our mental file and go, oh, that's Jane from grammar school. It's really more amazing than not. This truly wants to come on and join us. You know, I haven't read of any, but that'd be interesting to pursue. You want to talk a little more about it? Have a little moment here in the sun. No?
I'll let you talk for a
Okay.
The only thing I will say that
Wait a minute.
oh, I did, I think the forms come up, and they come up in a color that's set in the computer, but then aesthetically you can start to play with it and pull out, you know how there's that image of the old lady, you see either the old lady or the young woman? Well, in these, I think there's many things, and so and the colors help bring out certain patterns in one way and bring out something else in another.
Actually, I'll tell you what the coding is in the color in fractals. I guess I don't need this because I've got strange mics on under my clothes. Let's see. Now you're wondering where.
That's for the webcast.
That's for the webcast.
In almost all the pictures I just looked at, there seemed to be symmetry. And in examining them closely, I did find a couple of instances where I could see minor variations, but still a great deal of symmetry. Is that normal in fractals?
And that's the interesting thing about it, is that there's symmetry and there's balance and so forth, but it isn't exact. So this is really the geometry of inexactitude. So some of you may know there's a number of traditions, aesthetic, artistic traditions that say the human creator can never, you know, if you make something beautiful, you make some little defect on the bottom because you really should strive toward imperfection and embracing imperfection rather than trying to be perfect. And that's very much in the spirit of chaos, because in fact there will always be some little imperfection in the natural order of chaos. And again, let me reiterate that these are not done by human beings. These are what happens when you turn your back and let numbers do their thing. So the way these programs are done, and the way the fractal programs you pull down are done, is that a formula is placed into the computer, and then a number of iterations is programmed in. Iterate this formula 85 quadrillion times. And then this is what you'll get from that. So and let me tell you about the colors. Black represents a equation that when iterated will find its way to a single fixed point. So remember I told you about the numbers that go, you put in 25, it iterates and it goes to 14. You put in 85, it iterates to 14. You put in 5,000, it iterates to 14. It's called going to a fixed point. All the black spaces are contained. They go to a fixed point. As you move outward, the ones that are the different colors move to infinity, as they say. And by the way, I think you can iterate to more than one fixed point. I think, yes, some of them iterate to as many as 5 fixed points. But so they'll go 14, 15, 16, 17, 14, 15, 16, 17, no matter what you put in at the front. The colors represent how quickly they, as they say, escape to chaos or escape to infinity. So this means it goes 14, 15, 16, 9,000, 25,000, 85,000, and the hotter colors, like yellow, it escapes to chaos very quickly. The cooler colors are ones that kind of take their time and then escape to chaos. So there's a coding in the colors that allows you to know how many times of iteration it takes before chaos hits, you might say. And I am definitely speaking in very lay language here. So if there's anybody out there who's finding incorrectness, my apologies in advance. But I'm going to play some of this tape, and I'll also give you the ordering information at the end. This is a very good fractal tape of animation of fractals. What you're seeing on these are static fractals, a portion of one of these. This video is animated fractals. And they're very hard to do because it takes lots of computing power. And these have been done at Cornell, which has a supercomputer that does these animated fractals. And its official title, as released by Cornell, is Mandelbrot sets and Julia sets, which apparently didn't sell very well because it was commercially released under the charming title of Mathematics for Lovers. um, which I just find quite cute. So I'll give you the ordering information at the end if you want to try to get it.
Is the animation the actual iteration?
It wants to talk to us at this point, so we'll let it. I'll turn it down a little and we can have it in the background. Yes, it's also what you might call a guided tour of the Mandelbrot set. So in some of them, it's moving from pixel to pixel across the Mandelbrot set and over to the edge and then back. So each one of them is like a pixel from the Mandelbrot set, if you can follow what that means. But, you know, this tape is quite distracting. I can watch it straight through over and over again, and I want to hear more of what you think. So let me try putting it on pause again.
Yeah, a couple quick, easy questions.
Hope I can answer.
Yeah, I hope so. What type of equation is fed in, and can you give a definition of what that equation is?
Well, they're all nonlinear equations, and how to explain it. What is a nonlinear equation? You know, I don't know if I can say that in English.
That did this. First person I ran into, he had a master's degree in what's that subject that everybody has to get to go to graduate school? No, it's a math course.
Calculus?
No, not calculus.
Trigonometry?
No, you have to have it in order to get a master's degree. And it's the only person I ever knew that actually went into it. And this is a course that most people flunk and can't get their master's degree.
I think statistics. It sounds like
Statistics, yeah, that's the only person.
Sounds like statistics.
So right away, I'm really backed off because I knew how this guy thought, and I just didn't want to go there.
I think the easiest way to describe it is like a linear thing would be like addition. Like 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. And it just kind of, you know, you could keep adding any numbers of ones, and it still remains kind of on the same kind of. A nonlinear equation has a feedback loop, so it feeds back into itself. So I do 1 plus 1, and then I do 1 plus 1 plus 1. I'm not changing the base of my equation. I'm just adding on. Got it? Whereas a nonlinear equation, I used yesterday our Visa card bills. And then I heard on the way home a lecturer from Harvard on the increase in bankruptcies in America, you know, tied to compound interest. And I thought, yeah, we were just talking about that. So in a nonlinear equation, it'll be 1 plus 1 and then equals 2. And then the 2 gets fed back in. So the next part of the equation is based on the earlier part. So it's like this instead of like that. Did that make any sense at all? No. Yes, well, my Visa card interest certainly does. Yeah, exactly. And that's because the base changes. So like I say, 1 plus 1 is 2, and then add 1 is 3, and it just kind of keeps moving along in a linear fashion, as they say. The other kinds of equations, like compound interest, and by the way, some of the equations they use are enormously complicated. So this, you know, your compound interest or your mortgage is really very simple by comparison to what they're doing to pull these out of the woodwork. But that's basically the difference, is whether or not the next part of the formula is changed according to what the first part of the formula creates. So did that follow a little bit? And that's why when you have very complicated ones, they would take so much time to work out that I really strongly recommend you see Tom Stoppard's Arcadia, because it's a brilliant description of the maddeningness of the mathematics behind this. So what we're seeing in these is what numbers do when we're asleep. I do find this quite extraordinary, because I think many of us who are not naturally passionate about numbers, you know, who like say, gee, I think I'll go be an accountant for fun. That looks like so much fun to spend my life with numbers. Whereas I wanted to spend my life with words. But numbers seem flat and dry in many ways. They seem like they're not very magical. And yet there are lots of esoteric traditions that revolve around numbers. And some of them I do find a little, you know, unique and interesting. Just being careful in case some of you deeply believe in it. I've had people who will become quite, you know, animated talking about, you know, subtle differences in numerological things that I can't quite understand. But that I think what is behind that is a sense that there is real power and magic in numbers that is something that many of us don't really emotionally connect with. Yet when you look at what is happening with the numbers in chaos, you see that there is a basic mathematical design to our world. We are mathematically designed. Math really is an expression of something that is known to be a natural part of the natural world. A good example is the Fibonacci sequence, which is really very simple. Each number is the addition of the previous two numbers. So 1. I think I'm going to do that. I'll just depower it for the moment. So 1, and then 1 plus 1, and then 1 repeats, and then 1 plus 1 is 2, and then 1 plus 2 is 3, and then 2 plus 3 is 5, and so forth. It just keeps going up. The amazing thing about the Fibonacci sequence is it's found embedded in all natural growth. So it's been used to trace, you know, the relationship of parts of a sunflower, or the spiral of a shell. It's mathematically natural. It is not mathematically regular. It follows a rule, but it's not regular in the sense of everyone goes up by 2. And that's one of the differences between a chaotic way of thinking and a abstract and perfect way of thinking, you know, that says all you have to do is kind of go up logically. The Fibonacci sequence is really rather illogical, and when you look at it, if you don't know the Fibonacci sequence, you will see no pattern at all. But once you see what the code is, it's like, oh, that's so easy. You know, you just add the two together. And this has been found to be applied to all sorts of things that are natural, that are organic, I should say, not natural. So, for example, the way a seed grows. Sprout any bean and you'll see the Fibonacci sequence in action, because you have the seed, and then the seed begins to grow, but it's not visible. That's the second one. Then all of a sudden it doubles in size. It doesn't just kind of go up incrementally. But the next one, it doesn't double in size again. It goes up to 3, and then it goes up to 5. And so you can actually trace that growth.
You could make a graph of the Fibonacci series.
Yes.
You do the spiral, the whole spiral of life. So the fern frond,
Exactly.
the spiral in the colic in someone's hair,
Exactly.
all of the things in nature. Yeah.
And I suspect we might even find there's a Fibonacci sequence in our emotional growth. I mean, in the way we grow spiritually. I mean, I think that we could find these as natural patterns. And that's what we're looking at in chaos, is natural patterns.
Well, that's what I was going to say. As you know, as healer, Dora always talked about the order in the universe, and in healing, we're bringing order to disorder. So for me, fractals are a visual representation of the order in the universe, and in an infinite variety.
Other questions and comments? We got another one here. Hold on, we're trying to get the mic so that everyone can hear at their various locations.
In the Da Vinci Code, they talk about the pi, which is the relationship in human beings of their height, and let's see, I think it's the height from the waist to the floor, and then from their head to the floor, and the division is always the same of every human being, no matter how tall or short they are, and even of animals. Turtles and
that's the famous picture with the person in the circle. And yes, math is, however abstract it sounds, it has its basis in the natural proportions of our world and in the natural cycles of our world. but nature is a little more erratic and eccentric than some visions of it have shown us. It isn't this perfect thing that we're striving toward, and all of our world is wrong. Our world is right. It's just as it is, it's right. We just have to figure out the way into that rightness. Other comments and questions? As you can see, I love chaos. I resent it when my life gets disorderly, and I have to remind myself of the things I've said enthusiastically in class about chaos.
I was just going to give my personal impressions. When I held these pictures, I just felt energy and movement.
Very
and just,
good.
woo!
Very nice.
Yeah, just a wow, wonder.
Yeah, yeah. There's a beauty to them. And there is an energy. I like that. Any other personal comments, reactions?
One thing I remember is your statement, something to the effect that just because I feel out of control doesn't mean that things are out of control.
Right.
That was powerful for me.
Thanks. We have another one over there.
Just one last comment for now. No, I really.
Don't stop now.
I think I'm looking into the universe. Is what I think I'm doing. As far-fetched as that sounds, I really feel like I'm getting a glimpse of creation, what have you.
That is wonderful. And there are certain images here where you're falling into these self-similar forms that I really feel like I'm looking at the Big Bang. I'm looking at, the moment of creation. There's something really primal about many of these images to me. And then when I remind myself that they weren't drawn by a genius artist, that they were just iterations of formulae, which seem so dead and abstract and boring, then it becomes even more sort of dazzling to me. I do find myself often sort of dazzled by the images of chaos. I mentioned yesterday that finding books of fractal imagery found in nature is a very good way to find your way into this field. And did anybody go out and look at trees and see their little fractals? They're easier to see in winter, there they stand, and you say, oh, I see. And I've been practicing drawing tree branches, and once I get it, I remember the first day I saw what an oak looked like. And remember, I grew up in Alaska. We only have 11 kinds of trees. 7 of them are willows. And so I'm used to a very small palette. And I would look at all these trees. And then one day I went, oh my God, that's an oak. And all of a sudden I saw the gnarly fractal shape of an oak. And I was like, how did I miss that before? And once you move into being able to see the whole shape of a tree, the whole fractal nature, you just never forget. And now they all look like big ants to me, They're all kind of gnarly. And then there's the little ashes with their little, dancy look. And I was just like, when I realized that that's how I had to learn trees and that was an easy way to learn trees, I had no trouble after that. Whereas before I would look at them and I think I'm supposed to look at the tips of they're too far away to see the tips. So the fractal way of seeing nature will open all sorts of possibilities for you. Okay, I have some notes that I wanted to bring out to remind myself of some of the spiritual lessons. I mentioned yesterday that I was particularly delighted to talk here because usually I talk about the math and the science. But what really drew me to chaos is the emotional and spiritual lessons to be learned from the science. So here I can come grandly out of the closet and talk directly about those rather than cloaking them in abstract mathematic formula, hoping that you'll get it. One thing I find interesting is how rather consoling it is to know that this is science-based. And I think this comes from the scientism of our culture, that science is very valued, maybe overvalued. Science is real. That's the hard stuff. That's the truth. And no matter how much we may really believe in something mythically, something from our dreams and so forth, in our culture, Western culture, not to assume we're all from the same culture, but Western culture sort of promotes the idea that the dream world, the imaginative world and so forth, the literary world, is a little bit softer and not as real and not as truthful. So if I understand something from spiritual readings, from from contact with others and so forth. This culture tends to diminish that as well. Yeah, maybe that's only partially true. You know, that might be relatively true, but then, you know, something that comes from science, well, that's really true. So there's something kind of consoling to me about the fact that these come out of science. And that's, I recognize, an irrational consolation, and one that I don't even believe, because I don't believe that the world of dreams and literature and poetry is lesser. But as anyone who grew up in a scientific culture, we really do get this idea that that's the real thing, you know, that's truth, you know, because it makes the computers work, so it must be true. Whereas if it makes the heart work, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, it's all relative. So I want to share with you some of the lessons that I have found from the study of chaos. And the first one is, there is no such thing as perfection. In the studies of noise and silence, this came from applying chaos theory to static and telecommunications systems. It was an attempt to kind of figure out where the static was so it could be removed, and then you would have perfect clarity. And this is a wonderful metaphor, I think, for everyone's life. I am trying to finally clean my basement so there will be no disorder in my house. How did that stuff get back in the junk drawer? You know, I mean, our life is this endless struggle against disorder. I mean, our ideal is that our home should be perfectly orderly. We should run on schedule. And hey, I'm Irish. I'm not even German, and I'm saying this. You know, I mean, I still believe that, you know, we should be orderly. I should get my place in order. I should get my emotional life in order. I should be perfect in all ways. Chaos tells us that there's no such thing as perfection. In the studies of the static and telecommunications systems, they found that there was no place that didn't have some static, and there was no static that didn't have some parts of complete clarity. That there is such an interpermeation of static and silence, or static and, you know, perfect clarity, that you can't take them apart. There's no way to take out the sections of static without losing some of the clarity. And then if you do try to take them out, then you find that there's other bits of static in the other areas that you thought were clear. There's no perfection. Perfection is impossible. There's no purity. There's no place where it's all gotten together. It's always going to be a jumble. And that's kind of a relief, you know. And also it's a relief to know that that's a scientific fact and not just my delusory hope. I can be forgiven because, you know, my basement is disorderly, but that's the way nature is. In fact, it's an absolute fact. And if I do get my basement finally in order, my garage is going to get dirty. Something is always going to need attending. And to start having a sense that it's all a process of endlessly cleaning it up only for it to get dirty again is really different than feeling like I should be able to get it together once and for all and it should stay gotten together. It won't stay gotten together. You know, a friend of mine who I wrote a book about meditation called Meditation, the Complete Guide, with a yogi master in Alaska, one of my dearest friends. And she's about 30 years older than me. And she's now having, you know, questions about whether she should get her knees replaced and, you know, stuff like this. This is someone who has like been the fittest person you've ever seen in your life. And she said she's finally accepted the fact that good health is just a slow way to die. You know? And she's about 81 now. And I thought that was just a wonderful phrase. Good health, a slow way to die. And in fact, you know, that's the natural cycle. We're just not going to get it perfect. And what we do is we struggle for something that is more balanced as opposed to more perfect. And that's a different thing. If I'm looking for balance rather than perfection, people who are looking for perfection are some of the most unbalanced people I know. You know, they can be really pretty relentless. Whereas people who are looking for balance can kind of go, oh, well. Someone was just telling me the other day about the story, was it Susan Saltzman, is that her name? The Buddhist master who said, after she just dropped and broken something. I am such a klutz, but I love me, you know. and that's really what the idea of not striving for perfection but for balance is about. That's probably to me the primal, most important thing I've gotten out of the study of chaos, is that the natural cycle is chaotic. I will never get it so together that there isn't some other surprise that life will have for me. Some of them will be good surprises, some of them will not be good surprises, but there will always be change. Change is what life is about. Change and growth, and one would hope growth. But growth also comes, you know, with death. That's the natural cycle. It's kind of self-defeating, that attempt to be perfect as opposed to be balanced. When you look at the mathematics of chaos, one of the things that's really interesting, and one of the areas in which chaos theory has been applied, is in study of heart arrhythmias. And they have found that one thinks of one's heart as beating regularly, right? Well, it does beat regularly, but it also kind of flutters every once in a while. Again, probably untechnical language. But what does happen right before a heart attack? Extremely rigid, absolutely predictable, and it's almost like you can't have a heart that's that absolute and perfect. When your heart is beating perfectly, you're about to have a heart attack. That is a really interesting fact. The natural heart has a bit of arrhythmia to it. If you have too much, you know, you're having trouble. But if you have a perfectly regular heartbeat, that is an indication of a brewing heart attack. It's almost like da 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 da. Okay, now I'm going to catch up on the chaos. Bam! So you actually want irregularity even in your natural system. That the sense of perfection, I just find it fascinating that your heart can't be perfect. And I mean, well, what does that do to all the Valentine's Day pictures, you know? Take my imperfect heart, you know. My heart will not be perfect. And I had rheumatic fever for a number of years as a kid, and I had a lot of heart arrhythmia. So I was very interested to discover that heart arrhythmias are really more natural than over-regularity is actually a problem. So perfection is not actually what we should be looking for, but rather balance and flexibility. Life's going to throw things at us. If we are so rigid and needing everything to be perfect, when life throws us a really complicated thing to deal with, we're not going to be able to duck. You know, we're going to be standing there because we're holding ourselves so perfectly rigid. So not looking for perfection has been one of the most important spiritual lessons of chaos. A corollary to that is that the only predictable thing is change. I can't, you know, really tell you what will happen today, except that, you know, something will happen. Everything is change. A way to look at that, too, is that change does not represent failure. It's very frequent that we associate, you know, we finally got, you know, that junk drawer cleaned up, and now more junk isn't, therefore we failed. We had a relationship and, you know, gosh darn it, it broke up. We got divorced. We failed. A friend of mine's husband died recently, and in one of my attempts to console her, I said, well, you know, one thing that you know this means is that you had a successful relationship. You know, there's only two possible things that can happen in a marriage, divorce or death, you know, so the successful ones end with somebody being bereaved. And she looked at me and she said, I know you're meaning well with it. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling. I'm really, but you know, change is coming, you know, you're going to have change. So is it going to be one kind of change or the other? It's going to be change. That's really hard to accept because, I mean, I think all of us, particularly in periods when things are going well, we want it to just keep on going. When things are going badly, it's very consoling. Life is change. But you know, the tarot wheel of the Wheel of Fortune, the people on top are going down, people on bottom are coming up, people on bottom are feeling better about going up, and the people on top going down. But it's happening. The wheel will always be turning. And again, flexibility allows us to take what life deals out to us without breaking. You know, if we're so invested in, I'm going to hang on to this relationship even if, you know, it is bad, well, when it breaks up, it'll be really ugly. If you hold on to a job that you're not happy in, I'm currently encouraging a friend to quit now before they fire her, you know, because you hung on to the job where nobody's happy. Eventually it will come to some horrible end, and you might as well give up, go gracefully. Change is inevitable. And as I said yesterday, I come from a background where I really was very rigid. I'm speaking to myself when I talk about these things. One that's really, really nice for me to think about is that details count. Small things count. Because I see a lot of problems in the world, and sometimes it feels really overwhelming to think about how we're ever going to, the glaciers are melting in Alaska, things are going, bad things are happening, you know, people are dying, and I think that I don't count. I'm just one person. And yet, because of the butterfly effect, we don't actually know how the small things we do affect people. So maybe the fact that when I go through the toll booth, I smile at the person means that they have a slightly happier day, and when they go home, they don't beat their kids, you know? I mean, we don't actually know what happens with the energies that we set loose into the world. And little things, we tend to be a society, again, that values big things. You know, a lot of this, a lot of money, a lot of whatever. As a complete digression, I want to say that I got an Oxford English dictionary for $5 at a garage sale a few years ago, which has changed my life. I'm constantly looking up words. You know, what does it mean? What does it actually mean? Well, the word galore is an interesting word. We hear it all the time. Savings galore, you know, cars galore. Well, galore is the Gaelic word for enough. Isn't that cool? You know? The idea of, you know, when somebody says, well, we've got food galore, actually means we've got enough food. Not that we've got surplus. Not that we've got, you know, so much we have to, you know, find a place to store it, but we just have enough. So in the same way, small things, you know, the small things that we do can actually make a difference. Maybe that tree we plant, you know, changes the amount of oxygen available in our neighborhood in 20 years, in 30 years. Everything that we're doing has an effect. This can start to feel really overwhelming. Oh, dear. Is that true? Well, then that means all of the bad things we're doing also have an effect. But since we can't be perfect, that's okay, right? But thinking of the details mattering and the small things having power is, to me, very, very consoling in a world where it often feels like we don't have much effect on the huge events of our times. Another one that's kind of big and that I ponder a lot is the question of, and this is a kind of spiritual version of you can't be perfect. I'm never going to get the whole thing. I don't have to, you know, I can keep trying, but I'm never going to see the whole pattern. The pattern of this universe is so vast, so amazingly complicated, that we'll never see the whole thing. Well, we'll see our portions of it, and we can appreciate it, and we can be moved by it, and we can be changed by it, but we're never going to see the whole thing. In sort of conventional religious terms, you could say, I'm never going to see God face to face, you know. I'm going to see a portion of the grandness of this universe. And that's got to be enough, because there's no human being that can comprehend the enormity of the universe in which we live, which both frees me to be, you know, kind of forgiving when I don't get something, and also says, well, you know, I can be just childishly playful with all this. I can enjoy it. I can say, wow, cool, without always having to feel like I have to, okay, step back, figure out what that means exactly. How's that fit in the whole thing? All of this, as you can see, is kind of different than the kind of person who says, okay, I've got that fact, I've got to put it in that box. Instead, the chaos is a very fluid, comes out of fluid dynamics, after all, turbulence, all of that, and very forgiving kind of philosophy. Complex is not the same as complicated. I've learned to distinguish between the things that are complex in my life and the things that are complicated. And that's actually related to linear and nonlinear equations. Complicated things are just things that have one cause, but they just kind of keep, carrying on. Complex things have more than one cause. And sometimes I get mixed up about those. And I think, all of my problems are caused by my dean, That's a typical academic thing to say, so I'm not actually talking about my dean. All of our, if you're out there, all of my problems are caused by, fill in the blanks. Okay, right now, all of my problems are caused by this neighbor's kid who has decided that the street is a basketball court and keeps crushing my plants. All of my problems are, well, no, it's not, that's, life is more complex than that. One can wind up complicating one's life by not recognizing that some things are complex. In other words, trying to see one cause for everything, and that actually can cause more problems than recognizing that there are usually in our lives multiple causality. Finding out how to distinguish between the simple, meaning the complicated, and the really complicated, meaning the complex, has been really useful to me emotionally, more emotionally than I'd say than spiritually. I think that spiritually I always kind of got that it's a complex universe. Not being a monotheist, I never thought it was complicated. I always figured that there are multiple powers at work. Along the lines of that, this is going to sound very New Age, so my apologies in advance, that everything is connected. And the more you study the natural world, and including the mathematics that connects it, the more obvious it is that everything is really connected. That is not a kind of, we're all one with the universe, peace and love kind of thing. That is really the actual fact of the universe in which we live. Another connection there is to the butterfly effect, that we don't know what effect we're going to have in this endlessly, connected system when we throw bleach down, our toilet. It could wind up in Brazil. We really are connected. And if you meditate on the depth of the connection that we individually have with our world, it's really dazzling. And I think that spiritually we're probably connected as well. I have thought a lot recently that the thoughts that we're having are then expressed in language. Being a Quaker, I'm real aware of violence in language. So when you say, I'd like to kill him, what am I putting out? What am I encouraging subtly in other people to even think that that's a legitimate thing to say? Boy, they were just, you come out of a meeting, boy, they were just really beating up on each other. Well, no, technically they were not. And to use violent language in a casual way, to me, is morally questionable, because what are we like? Are we dulling ourselves to real violence? When someone says, boy, she was really screaming in there. No, she wasn't screaming, she was just agitated, she was enthusiastic, using the exact words for what's happening rather than, having overblown metaphors that often come out of violence and interpersonal difficulty, is one of the disciplines that I've been using, because as I see that things are connected, as I see that small events can have large consequences, both of those feed into the idea that I need to be responsible in all sorts of small ways, as well as trying to be responsible in larger ways. I do think it's also important to be responsible in large ways when we have the opportunity, but often we don't. And so knowing that we have the opportunity to make subtle changes. When Phil Jackson was I'm not a great sports fan, but when I first moved to Chicago, I tried real hard, because where I grew up, there weren't professional sports. And so I didn't know about the bonding that takes place when you say, what about that quarterback, and all that sort of stuff. So I tried real hard when I moved to Chicago to fit in, and I failed. But it was during the Phil Jackson time. One of the things I noticed was that, you know, these young strapping guys that come in and they're going, yeah, we're going to crucify them, we're going to kill them. And like within a year they're saying, we're working on our focus. You know. Here was a man who encouraged his team to speak in the vocabulary of art and meditation and not the vocabulary of hurting people. And it was very obvious within a very short time of joining the Bulls that their vocabulary would change. And so you'd see these like, you know, large, you know, impressive men speaking in these wonderful, delicate terms. It was lovely. So I hope he's gone on to share that elsewhere. Risk is impossible to avoid. This is kind of connected to the changes inevitable. We like to think, I suspect, that it's possible to decide how much risk we're going to individually involve in. I will opt for the conservative investment. Thank you, right. That's helped over the last few years, hasn't it? I will decide, you know, to follow or to say, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to skydive and be risky. In fact, life is risk. Because change is inevitable, life is risk. Now, the corollary to that is that the most creative solutions, the most creative ideas come at that point called, in chaos theory, the edge of chaos. When things are too rigid, no chance of anything but catastrophic breakdown. When things are so chaotic you can't find the pattern, you can't find the pattern. But at the point where you are flexible, you know, at the point where you're not completely clenching, holding on, you know, wanting to control, or saying, oh, well, you know, that's where creative solutions come in. So if you acknowledge that risk is inevitable, and you know that creativity lives at the edge of chaos, and you put that together, then you can dance with chaos. You can get right out to the edge and kind of, you know, see how far you can go and be comfortable and balanced. Neither avoiding risk nor seeking it. Knowing that change is there, knowing that change is inevitable, and seeing how you can engage with it. And similarly, looking to the edge of things for growth, looking in your life, in your relationships, in your psyche, in your soul. What's the point of tension and difficulty and, you know, stuff going on? Because where things are growing, they're often sort of agitated. And look there and see how you can move, how you can grow. We don't tend to grow from our centers. We tend to grow from our edges like plants, you know. As emotionally, you grow with the challenges that are given you, not with, you know, all the easy things. The easy things never help us grow. Or if they help us grow, it's because we look at them deeply enough to make them not easy. And then finally, we can be pulled by more than one attractor. And I'm going to show you, for the last 20 minutes or so, I'm going to show you parts of this movie and talk about what you're seeing there. But we, again, kind of being in a patriarchal monotheism generally, we have this sense that there's one truth and one truth only, you know, one way, all of that. In fact, mathematically and naturally, there are some things that have more than one center, more than one fixed point. It might move around. So for years I used to think, you know, people say, well, you just travel so much, and I do, I love traveling. But I am the biggest homebody that I know. I mean, I get in my house, you practically have to dynamite me out. I mean, I'm just like, I'm not leaving. And then the minute I buy a ticket, I'm like, out the door. And I always thought that this was something I ought to solve, some problem, because these seem to be opposite. And how can I be both a fanatic traveler and Martha Stewart, you know, of the South Side? I can't be both of those because they seem to be opposite. But if I'm actually just someone who has two fixed points, one of them my home and one of them any nearby airline terminal, then I'm really just acting naturally, you know. That's just the way I am. I love traveling and I love being home. I don't have to like settle the problem between them because I'm just going to always like both of them. If I were to be, you know, someone who was, When I first moved to Chicago, I didn't actually travel for about 2 years till I knew where all my whisks were. But once I knew where all my whisks were, I was out to that airport, looking to leave. So we may have more than one attracting force in our life, and other parts of, when I got into science and literature, well, those seem like they're opposites. That whole idea of opposites is really a delusion. Things aren't opposites, they're just different. You can legitimately be interested in multiple things. You can be pulled by different attractors. It's not a problem that you have to fix. You can just be that way. Know that you are one of those things that goes like this instead of like that. So those are some of the lessons I've gotten from chaos. As I say, the most important one is to stop trying to rigidly control and try to be perfect, and rather try to be flexible, balanced, and receptive to the world. Those are different things. Now, one could say, well, that would be like being perfect, but I think you know what I mean. Perfect is the, like, I never do anything wrong. I once had a cartoon on my wall in my office that showed somebody lying in bed saying, I never can figure out whether to do everything perfect all day or not get up at all. And I have decided that the better way is to get up and do things imperfectly. So, any comments or questions before we go into the movie?
We have a comment here from
okay.
We have a comment from one of our web viewers, a Mr. Jose Davila in Florida, and it's a